Rotterdam, Europe's largest container port and the gateway to England for thousands of Chinese illegal immigrants. To the smugglers, known as snakeheads, the trade is worth £120 million a year, or was, until last June. It was close to midnight on June the 16th when a group of Chinese illegal immigrants arrived at Rotterdam's central station after a grueling 6,000-mile trek by air, road and rail from Fujian province in southeast China. Channel 4 News has obtained the police statements from the only two survivors.
Different snakeheads met us along the route, giving us food, taking charge. At Rotterdam, we were met by 3 Chinese. One of them was from my hometown. He had left 4 or 5 years ago. We were split into small groups. The man from my hometown drove us away from the station in a black BMW saloon.
They were taken to this safe house and kept in a room for 2 nights awaiting instructions on how they were to be transported to their final destination. This was to be the last stage of their journey, a journey to what they hoped would bring them a future of prosperity. They came in different cars, groups of them from different safe houses, and they were gathered in that warehouse through the railings over there. It was in that warehouse that they were herded into a container, human cargo, ready for shipment to Britain. This was the layout drawn by the survivors of inside the warehouse when all 60 Chinese had been brought and loaded into the container. Once inside, 700 boxes of tomatoes were loaded on to hide the human parcels.
There were 4 or 5 white men in the warehouse. All communication was done using hand signals. The man stacking the tomatoes in the lorry explained that when the vent window was open, we could talk in a low voice, and when it was closed, we could not talk at all because we were crossing the border.
Perry Wacker was the driver. For him, the trip was supposed to have been easy money, £300 a head, 18,000 total for the return trip. But instead, he was convicted today on 58 counts of manslaughter. When closed-circuit television captured his truck coming off the ferry at Dover, 54 men and 4 women were dead in the back of the container. We cannot show the awful scene inside, which was filmed by a police cameraman on entering the back of the truck. But Kent police used 60 Gurkhas of similar size and weight to the Chinese to recreate what conditions must have been like crammed inside the sealed metal box when Wacker closed the only access to air, the vent.
I felt I was going to die soon. Kesudi and myself held hands and comforted each other for a few minutes. I started grabbing tomatoes from the floor, eating them quickly. We have a saying in Chinese, it is better to die with a full belly than hungry.
At 45, He Changming was the oldest of the 58 to die inside the sealed container. His family in China had paid the snakeheads £18,000 for safe delivery. His brothers in England live in fear. One only agreed to talk, provided his face was hidden.
We only heard later when pictures of the dead were published. The pictures were unclear, so we were not certain. My younger brother went to the morgue, but was still not sure. Second time we both went, then we were sure. I was really heartbroken. I cried a lot.
Alongside Wacker in the dock was a Chinese interpreter, Jenny Guo, the other foot soldier in the conspiracy to smuggle in illegal immigrants. Her mobile phone number was found on 27 of the bodies, written on scraps of paper or pieces of clothing, one victim's socks, another victim's trousers. The survivors say it was given to them in Rotterdam by a snakehead.
He told us that if we were arrested in England, we should ring Miss Guo on the number, and she could get us bailed straight away.
Today, Jenny Guo, the fixer, was jailed for 6 years, but she'd been London's meter and greeter to hundreds of illegal immigrants long before the Dover tragedy. In fact, she dealt with around 7% of all Chinese asylum applications to the Home Office in that time. These properties were used by Guo at one time or another as safe houses to accommodate her new arrivals. Rented houses in suburbia all over London and the southeast, which were temporary addresses holding up to 10 people at any one time. Armed with a diploma in English, she used a vast network of firms of solicitors all over the capital who were all unaware of the true organised background to these asylum claims. In one East London high street alone, she employed 3 legal practices, all within 100 yards of each other. She supplied them with dozens and dozens of asylum cases. Just one solicitor would talk to us about Ms. Guo, but only on condition of anonymity for fear of reprisals.
Did Miss Guo ever say how she came into contact with these people that she was bringing?
I asked her once, and she said, I always go to Chinatown and I find these people there, and they ask for help.
In the street?
In Chinatown.
For months, Channel 4 News has been in Chinatown, chasing those operating in this dangerous twilight world of the snakeheads, the ones behind Wacker, Guo and the Dover setup. The authorities, both here and in Holland, have been tracking these people for some time, and a number are awaiting trial in Rotterdam. No one in the Chinese community will talk openly about the organizations, either because of fear or self-interest, but sources both inside the community and in law enforcement agencies have told us that one of the country's 3 most powerful snakeheads had employed Guo as his fixer. One man who has detailed knowledge of all of them through his work as a translator knows the identity of Guo's boss, who he refers to as D.
She works for him as a translator. She goes to Dover, Waterloo, using the solicitors as a disguise.
Why is she involved with D?
She's paid to do so, a few £100 each.
So Guo was sent by D?
Of course.
And she will pay the price?
They probably have a private arrangement.
The National Criminal Intelligence Service has been monitoring those in control of the smuggling rackets. D is one of them. They told us that this snakehead disappeared immediately after the Dover tragedy. But we tracked him down to a takeaway in southeast London. We can't show his face and we can't identify him because he's under investigation. But this is Mr. D, who controls a 110-strong organisation from the humble trappings of his takeaway restaurant. Ensis told us he's the trickiest of players. How big is the network?
Around 100 people coming in per week in 2 or 3 trucks.
How much does he earn?
At least £1 million a year.
Whoever gets to meet Mr. D?
No one, only his followers.
Mr. D's Rotterdam connection is a mysterious Chinese lady known as Sister Ping. She's said to have more than 100 people doing her bidding all over Europe. She's rarely seen and her reputation is legendary. On just one day in 1997, she smuggled a total of 108 people into Britain. This man, whose brother died on the Dover crossing, came face to face with her on his journey through Rotterdam to England.
I met her in her house. She's in her 30s, speaks Mandarin, wears expensive clothes and jewelry, hair shoulder length. She is very beautiful and very commanding.
She guarantees they'll make it to Britain?
She has a very good reputation sending people to UK with a very high success rate. So people never thought 58 people would die.
How successful is she?
She has been getting 200 people in per week to the UK for the last few years.
So she's made a lot of money?
Yes, but she has gambled a lot. So one hand is making money, the other hand losing money.
Every smuggling operation has the risk of a brutal and ruthless endgame if the immigrant's family fails to meet the costs. The result? Kidnap and extortion. Detective Sergeant Jim Reeves is attached to the Metropolitan Police's Kidnap unit. He knows only too well of the consequences of a failure to pay.
When the people arrive obviously in our example speaking for the UK, the family members are expected to pay the money to the snakehead.
On arrival?
On arrival. Sometimes they can pay in advance, but generally it's on arrival.
And if they don't?
And if they don't, then you'll have the situation where phone calls will be made to the family and they will be told that if the money's not paid, the person in the United Kingdom will be beaten up, harmed. We've had instances where the victims have listened to their family members screaming down the phone because they've been assaulted at the same time. And there's also a fine system which generally runs at $150 US dollars a day for every day that you're late with your payment.
Do you recognise that man?
This is footage of the country's biggest ever kidnap operation, never seen before. When police stormed a safe house in West London, they found it difficult to distinguish between hostage and kidnapper. Eventually, the victims were marked H for hostage and given a number. They'd been held by the Snakeheads for 8 days. £20,000 ransoms were demanded from the hostage families in China. All the men arrested in these pictures were convicted and jailed in 1999. One of them, Chen Wenpeng, told us from his cell that those abductions were ordered from Rotterdam by none other than Sister Ping. She is sought by various police forces all over the world. After June the 18th, she disappeared from Rotterdam and surfaced in Thailand. She's now believed to have returned to Europe and is back in business. But our inquiries into the people behind the trade in Rotterdam have led to another disturbing question. Many of those behind the scenes were under surveillance or known about by the authorities both in Holland and Britain. So could the 58 deaths have been prevented? What happened on the June the 18th crossing very nearly happened 2.5 months earlier on the same route controlled by the same gang. On April the 5th, 50 Chinese migrants, clients of Mr. D and Sister Ping, were on their way to Dover on board a ferry in a container. Halfway across, they started to run out of air.
The air became less and less. The container became very hot. I was kicking the door to get attention. By the end, my feet were bleeding. I thought I would die very soon. And the women started screaming and crying. There was a child in the lorry.
I vomited a lot, vomit and vomit. I thought about my husband and thought I wouldn't see him again before dying.
Their Dutch driver, Leo Nijveen, heard the screams and let them out. When interviewed by immigration and police at Dover, he claimed to know nothing. 45 minutes later, he was released. Back in Rotterdam, 8 weeks later, Mr. Nijveen popped up in a long-running Dutch surveillance operation prompted by information from British police and immigration intelligence. Using secret cameras and tracking equipment, police filmed a number of meetings at the Avant-Garde Hotel New York. The central figure was a known human smuggler, Gürzel Özkan. He was seen visiting Nijveen's apartment in the suburbs 3 weeks before the Dover tragedy. And guess who else turned up that day? From the Dutch police surveillance records obtained by Channel 4 News, Perry Wacker, the man convicted today for killing 58 immigrants, was seen at that address at the same time. Özkan and Nijveen's, seen here from the back last month in a Rotterdam court, are among 7 awaiting trial charged with the manslaughter of the Dover 58. Their lawyers claim the authorities knew so much about Özkan they had to have known about plans for the June the 18th crossing.
The English were investigating him, the Dutch were investigating him, so they knew all the time exactly what he was doing. And they show us nothing about this, and they say that they do not want to have it in the clear. They do not want to tell us what exactly happened. And this means that I think they could, if they had done their jobs well, they could easily have prevented this crime and the disaster.
So was this a failure of intelligence by both British and Dutch authorities, or was this smuggling operation allowed to continue in the hope of ensnaring the snakeheads? With ongoing sensitive inquiries in London, the Home Office refused to be drawn on what they knew before and what they now know of those controlling the route. No one knows how many are now coming in on the backs of lorries every night through Dover. According to Home Office figures, recorded numbers of Chinese asylum applications has dropped by 2/3 since the tragedy. In this trade, no one is supposed to die. It's bad for business. Bad in China, bad in Holland, bad in England. But today, only foot soldiers have been found guilty. June the 18th was, in effect, corporate manslaughter. And yet those controlling the trade, the snakeheads in London and Holland, are still free and still in business.